Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is the 1980 Italian horror film, City of the Living Dead, also known as The Gates of Hell, although I think the original Italian title for this actually translated to Fear in the City of the Living Dead. Now, City of the Living Dead, or The Gates of Hell, was co-written and directed by Lucio Fulci, who was one of the big names in Italian horror. Like, usually when people in America tend to think of Italian horror, they tend to think of either Mario Bava, Dario Argento, or Lucio Fulci. In fact, that's sort of an argument I've heard among horror fans is, who's better, Argento or Fulci? Like, it's almost like the Rolling Stones versus the Beatles argument, but for fans of European horror. Now, Lucio Fulci actually had a pretty prolific career even outside of horror. I know he did several comedies, as well as several spaghetti westerns early in his career, but horror is what he's best known for. He also directed films like Don't Torture a Duckling, The New York Ripper, The Black Cat, Manhattan Baby, and of course Zombie 2, which was my introduction to Lucio Fulci. Now, City of the Living Dead is actually considered to be the first of sort of a loosely connected trilogy called the Gates of Hell trilogy, the other two films in this series being The Beyond and The House by the Cemetery, both of which came out a year later. Now, City of the Living Dead was heavily inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. In fact, the movie is set in the town of Dunwich, which is a fictional town from H.P. Lovecraft's short story, The Dunwich Horror, but I believe the town has also appeared in other Lovecraft stories as well. Like, the movie really does feel like Lovecraft meets Romero, but made with a very David Lynchian sensibility. But I love City of the Living Dead. It's definitely one of my favorite Lucio Fulci movies, of the movies of his I've actually seen, and it's one of my favorite Italian horror films, and definitely one of my favorite zombie films. Even though calling this exclusively a zombie film doesn't really do the movie justice, because it really almost defies classification, because there's also demons and ghosts, and the whole movie is so surreal and dreamlike. Like, it almost feels like a nightmare put to film. Like, the way I would almost describe this is, let's say you read a bunch of H.P. Lovecraft stories and watch Romero's Dead trilogy while having COVID, and this is sort of the fever dream you have after all that. So, the plot of City of the Living Dead is it begins where this woman named Mary, who is a psychic, is taking part in this seance, and she has a vision of a priest committing suicide in the town of Dunwich, which causes the gates of hell to open within the town. After having this vision, she seemingly dies. It turns out she's still alive, and they actually end up burying her alive, but fortunately she's saved by a journalist who was investigating into her case. I'm not really sure why they didn't embalm her, but whatever. And in the town of Dunwich, this priest named Father Thomas ends up coming back as a kind of a demon, and he's causing the dead to rise from their graves, as well as other strange supernatural happenings, which include a maggot storm and a girl literally puking out her own intestines. So, this psychic and this journalist must race against time and get to the town of Dunwich before All Saints' Day, because if the gates of hell are allowed to remain open on that day, basically Satan's armies will overtake the earth. Now, the film stars Catriona MacColl as Mary Woodhouse, the psychic. Now, MacColl would go on to be in the other two Gates of Hell movies, playing different characters. I also really liked Christopher George as Peter the journalist. He was definitely the most likable character in the movie, and also the most believable in my opinion, because he felt the most down-to-earth. Like, of all the characters in the movie, he was the one character who truly felt like, okay, what would it be like if a real person actually got caught up in all this? The other characters in the movie are serviceable enough, but Fulci would probably be the first to tell you that this movie in particular, it's more about tone and atmosphere than it is about plot and characters. Now, if you're a fan of Italian horror, there are definitely some familiar faces in this, like the same actor who played Jack in Cannibal Holocaust, Pirkanen. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but he plays one of the gravediggers in the beginning of the film who is burying Mary. You also have Giovanni Lombardo Radice, who is in films like Cannibal Apocalypse and Cannibal Ferox, and The Church, playing a character named Bob in this movie, who is this real weird guy who lives in the town of Dunwich that everybody hates, and in fact, when people start dying, they think he's responsible. You also have Miguel Soavi, whose name I know I'm butchering, but he would go on to be in Demons, and he would actually go on to be a director himself. He would direct movies like The Church, The Sect, and Della Morte Dell'Amore. But yeah, City of the Living Dead is a fantastic horror film, and the movie just drips mood and atmosphere, and there's some great gore effects in this movie. Like, you see people getting their brains ripped out from the back of their heads. This also has one of the most stomach-churning and nauseating scenes in horror history. It's a scene where the spirit of Father Thomas reveals himself to a teenage couple and actually causes the girl to puke out her own internal organs. I literally almost gag every time I watch that scene, and even just thinking about the scene causes me to get kinda queasy. And the ending of the film, it's very downbeat, but also very ambiguous at the same time, where it seems like the characters have failed to close the gates of hell, and it seems that hell's armies are going to overtake the earth. But at the same time, though, we don't really know what the fuck is going on at the end of the film. Like, the way the movie ends, like, we don't know what the hell's happening, but I like that because it adds to the whole dreamlike quality of the film. Lastly, I do gotta mention Fabio Frizzi's score for the movie, which is excellent, although there are some musical cues that did remind me a little bit of Goblin's score for Dawn of the Dead, and I'm not sure if that was done on purpose or not. Now I want to cut to my friend William Burns, who is a huge fan of Italian horror, giving his thoughts on City of the Living Dead, also known as The Gates of Hell.
When I first saw it, of course, it was called The Gates of Hell, and it was I rented it on VHS as a teenager, and I think this actually might have been the first Fulci film I ever saw, and I was just blown away by it, because I think The Gates of Hell cut, I think was pretty, I don't think it was censored that much. I think it was pretty much like the full cut, and I was like blown away by it. You know, I was like totally confused by it and like the ending of the film. You know, but I loved it though, and I think because of that film is when I started looking for other films by Lucio Fulci. So I rented House by the Cemetery, Zombie, The Beyond when it was called Seven Doors to Death. But that's how I really became aware of Fulci, was through that. Also through, I think there was some articles maybe in Gore Zone and Fangoria that I had read as well. But I love City of the Living Dead. It is a close second, even though I think The Beyond is a better movie. I don't know. I might love City of the Living Dead just as much, if not a little bit more, only because the setting is like, you know, is explicitly Lovecraftian, right? In Dunwich, and I'm a big sucker for like New England set horror movies. And again, it's another film where Fulci really gets the atmosphere right. It's a great balance between sort of like gore and sort of shocking violence, but also a really good atmosphere. Like at the beginning when the priest hangs himself in the cemetery. And, I just thought it was a great movie. I thought it was a movie in which you see Fulci really hitting his stride. Like, I really think that, you know, Zombie to a greater extent as well, but really City of the Living Dead, Beyond, House by the Cemetery, Black Cat, like, he was really hitting his sort of stride in making great horror movies.
So yeah, guys, if you're a fan of Italian horror, especially really weird Italian horror films, definitely check this out. But that was my review of City of the Living Dead, and my next movie review will be on the spiritual sequel to City of the Living Dead, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond.